"What's your emergency?" the dispatcher asked. "Yes, I need the police right now. There's a man refusing to move out of a property my son is entitled to. He won't leave and he's causing distress to our community," the woman snapped. Her voice was sharp, entitled. That woman was Cheryl. She stood right at the edge of my ranch driveway, dressed like she owned the whole county, phone pressed tightly to her ear while glaring at my front porch. I stood just behind my screen door, arms folded, boots planted firm on the wooden floorboards. I heard her words as clear as day. She didn't even try to whisper. She had the nerve to call 911 to demand that I, the rightful owner of this ranch for 15 years, get removed because her son deserved the land more. Her son, a grown man who couldn't even mow his own yard, let alone handle 60 acres of cattle, fencing, and irrigation systems. And she said I was causing a disturbance. I stared, waiting, not speaking a word. My German shepherd, Duke, stood beside me, tail low and growling softly. Cheryl's eyes locked onto mine through the mesh screen, her phone still pressed to her face as she said the line that made my stomach turn. "Yes, officer. Please hurry. My son has plans to develop this land. We're with the HOA and he needs it now. This squatter won't leave." Squatter. My hands clenched at my sides. She had crossed a line and she didn't even know the kind of storm she just invited, because the moment she made that call, she set off a chain of events that not even the HOA could control. But that wasn't the shocking part. Not yet. The real shock was the moment the cops actually showed up, sirens, lights, everything, and started walking toward me. That's when I knew this wasn't just about a nosy neighbor or a bad day. This was war. It all started 3 months ago when I decided to retire early and move full-time to my ranch in Oak Hollow Ridge, a quiet semi-rural community just outside Phoenix. I had inherited the property from my uncle, a hardworking rancher who taught me everything about land, livestock, and integrity. The land was big, peaceful, with a wraparound porch, a vegetable garden, and a few old barns I'd slowly started fixing up. It was heaven to me. My nearest neighbor was a half-mile away. At least that's how it used to be. Then came Cheryl. She moved into the neighborhood with her 28-year-old son, Brandon, and everything changed. I noticed them first when I caught Brandon trying to fish in my private pond. When I politely asked him to leave, Cheryl stormed down the gravel road and accused me of being unneighborly. I explained firmly but kindly that the pond was on private land. I even showed her the boundary markers, but she didn't care. That same week, she tried to claim that my fencing was 2 feet too far to the west, even though the markers had been set by a licensed surveyor. "I'm with the HOA, she'd said, holding up a laminated card like it was some kind of badge. "And we'll need to talk about your compliance." I reminded her my property wasn't under the HOA's jurisdiction. It was clearly exempt. The paperwork said so. My uncle had opted out decades ago when the HOA was formed. Cheryl's eyes narrowed. "That will need to change," she said, cold as a rattlesnake. I thought she'd give up after that. I really did. But every week something new came up. First she said my barn was too old and an eyesore. Then she said my rooster was too loud. Then she said the dust from my gravel drive was agitating her allergies. But the worst was when I found her son Brandon in my barn. Inside my barn. He said he was just exploring. That's when I installed cameras every corner of the ranch. Front gate, back pastures, the barn, the garden, everything. And it turns out that was the smartest thing I ever did, because that call to 911, that wasn't just an empty threat. The day Cheryl stood outside my property and made that call, she wasn't bluffing. She was serious. She wanted me gone. She had convinced herself and probably her son that I didn't belong here and they had more vision for this land than I ever could. When the sheriff's cruiser pulled up, I expected things to get sorted quickly, but I never expected what came next. The 2 officers walked slowly toward my porch. Cheryl smiled like she had just won a prize on a game show. Brandon stood behind her, arms folded, looking smug. The taller officer approached. "Are you Mr. Barnes?" "Yes, sir," I replied calmly, respectfully. I had nothing to hide. "We received a call regarding a property dispute," he said. "The woman over there says you're living on land that doesn't belong to you." "What?" I blinked. "She claims this property was promised to her family through an HOA transfer," he said, flipping through a notepad. I stepped forward, keeping my voice level. "Sir, I have the title deed. The land's been in my family since 1979. I'm not under any HOA. They have no authority here. He raised a brow. Would you be willing to show me that documentation? Absolutely, I said, already walking inside to get my files. When I returned, I handed him the thick folder with every legal document needed: title, tax records, exemption notice, even my uncle's original opt-out letter from the HOA. He flipped through it, nodding slowly. But just as he was about to speak, Cheryl yelled from the fence line, "Don't let him fool you. That ranch is supposed to be ours. My son is a veteran. He deserves that land." Now that was a lie. Brandon had never served a day in the military. The officer's jaw tightened. That's when things took a sharp turn, because Cheryl didn't stop there. No. She marched up the driveway, shoved the officer's shoulder, and pointed at me like I had committed a crime. "You need to remove him right now," she screamed. "He's not part of this community. My son has development plans. We need him gone." And the officer, he looked at me, then looked at her. Then he said something I'll never forget. "Ma'am, step back and don't touch me again." But Cheryl, she wasn't done. She shouted one final sentence that changed everything. "Then I'll file an emergency injunction with the HOA board and make sure you're evicted by Friday." I blinked. Evicted from my own land. But just as I stepped off the porch to respond, Brandon ran up to the officer shouting and swung a punch. The moment his fist flew, everything changed. And so began the war for the ranch, me land, my home, my future. And I wasn't backing down. Not now. Not ever. That punch never landed where Brandon intended. The officer dodged slightly, and Brandon's fist glanced off the brim of the deputy's hat before slamming into his shoulder. It wasn't a knockout blow, but it was enough. The second deputy, who had been lingering near their cruiser, surged forward. In one practiced motion, he spun Brandon around, locked his arms behind his back, and slammed him against the hood of the car. "You just assaulted a law enforcement officer," the deputy growled. "Congratulations, son," Cheryl screamed. She rushed forward, flailing, but the officer stepped in her path. "Ma'am, you need to back off now. You can't do this. This is our land." "He provoked my son." "He did no such thing," the officer snapped, eyes narrowing. "He stood there peacefully while you two ranted and made false claims. Now you've escalated this beyond a civil dispute." As Brandon was shoved into the back seat of the cruiser, Cheryl's face twisted in rage. "You'll regret this. The HOA will see you're nothing but a squatter." I didn't respond. I didn't have to. The camera above the porch recorded every second. And that was just the beginning.